Henry Bain is with us today on the Azure DevOps podcast.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the Azure DevOps podcast. Go online to www.azuredevops.show to see show notes and other episodes. Today we are talking about security with DevOps. And to discuss this is Henry Bain. He's an independent DevOps and Azure architect from the Netherlands. He enjoys working with development teams to create and deliver great software. And for him, this includes the full DevOps cycle, starting from discovering and planning new features and ending only when end users are satisfied. Henry's interests include the Azure Cloud, DevOps, software architecture, and the design and implementation of testable and maintainable software. Next to his work, he is one of the Microsoft ALM DevOps Rangers, a group of 130 engineers worldwide who share professional guidance and create gap-filling solutions surrounding Azure. Henry, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. You recently presented to the Azure DevOps user group.
Yes,
that?
I did. As in a webinar form, as you knew, it was the first time for me, so that was really interesting to give a try.
Yeah, you've been globetrotting a bit on the conference circuit, haven't you? Doing some speaking events.
Yes, in the Netherlands mostly, relating secret deployments along Azure code to production environments. I've done a couple of times, and I've done 2 talks in the rest of Europe, in Mechelen and in Dublin, regarding an architecture for database per tenant.
Awesome. So how have you found yourself in the DevOps space? What's, just for the listeners who aren't familiar with you, how's your career kind of steered you in this direction?
I've been developing software on the Microsoft stack for 5 years now. And of course, like everybody else, it started out with coding and not really caring about what happens afterwards. But over the years, I've started growing an interest in how do I get the thing I've built into production and being used by customers as quickly as possible. And slowly started getting more and more interest in not just coding, but in fulfilling a need. And that's what has driven me to DevOps.
Okay. And the ALM DevOps Rangers, that's an interesting group. For those not familiar, why don't you share a little bit about that?
Sure. The ALM Rangers, as they used to be called before, are a group of volunteers worldwide. They are not working at Microsoft, but they worked with the product group. And I've always done like gap-filling solutions and guidings surrounding the ALM products. I think the branching guide is one of the well-known examples from the past. But with DevOps coming up and newer versions of TFS and of course VSTS, now Azure DevOps, interest started moving to DevOps. And so the Rangers aligned them with that as well.
Okay.
So doing things like, for example, creating extensions for the the Azure DevOps Marketplace, especially when it was just new, was the thing the Rangers did.
Okay. Do you have a favorite extension?
Of course, the countdown widget, because that's the one I just recently took over from About the Court. So.
Oh, awesome. So they can search for countdown in the marketplace.
Yes.
And if I have it right, you just finished a half marathon a few months back.
Yes, that's true. Being in this profession, sitting down a lot, I must admit that a while back, my figure wasn't what it used to be. So I started exercising and running together with my wife, who took an interest in running as well. So we ran together, not necessarily after each other. And 2 months ago, I did a half marathon and survived and finished within the time allotted. So that's great.
Well, that's pretty impressive. I don't think that I've ran anywhere near that distance in my life.
Well, a year and a half ago, I think I couldn't run for 2 minutes in a row without feeling that I wasn't going to last much longer. And it was just a thing of really gradually increasing the pace and also the duration of training. And it worked because I'm in a lot better shape now than I was 2 years ago.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. So now the full marathon next year, right?
No, actually, I'm doing this weekend. I'm doing 15K. So that's a little under 10 miles.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, let's stop talking about things that I'll never do. No.
You never know. You never know.
Right. Well, DevOps is kind of like a marathon. How's that for a segue?
Deep.
Yeah, exactly. So DevSecOps is a term people have been throwing around, and a lot of folks are just trying to get their heads around what DevOps is and how to implement it in their environment. They're working with Visual Studio, deploying things to Azure or definitely to Windows servers, if they happen not to be in Azure. But then the security gets tossed in the middle. Of course, we understand security is important, but how did that term come about, and what are the things that people just need to know?
I think a lot of people, when they talk about DevOps, the focus often shifts to one DevOps practice, continuous deployment. It's often the thing where people start, and for some people, it's like the thing, and they make it almost a synonym to DevOps. And when you start focusing only on getting stuff into production more and more often, you can lose sight of other things, like, for example, reliability or security. So I think it's a bit of a counter move of people to get the attention to security that it deserves, and also expanding on the idea of getting together. You had Dev and Ops working together, and now let's bring security in the team as well, instead of fighting each other over releasing more often versus maybe releasing less often.
Okay. And if someone wants to bake in security into their DevOps practice, what do they need to start thinking about?
Well, what I did was, because I'm a lazy developer, so I don't like doing things by hand, especially not things like security reviews or explaining to people why what I've done is secure or not. So I like to embed things in the pipeline, shift left. What we've also done with quality assurance testing over the last couple of years. And I think that at different points in your build process, maybe starting even at inception, you can add security practices to your pipeline, making your process, you're hardening your process, your pipeline of delivery.
Okay.
And that can be at inception, coding, when compiling, building, when releasing, and of course when operating as well. So at every stage of software development, application lifecycle, there are things you can do to be more secure.
Okay. What are some of those things that folks should look at?
I don't know. I think there are a lot of things. A personal favorite of mine is to start thinking with, why can't you just kick everybody from production access? If you walk up to a team and you say, who can access, I don't know, the production database, or who can access the app service that hosts your code, there will probably hands go up. And what is blocking you currently from just kicking everybody out of production access? And see if you can use other means to achieve the goals that you want to achieve with current production access. I don't know, security settings, secrets, for example, is a thing that people used to put in by hand in the app settings configuration. Well, there are means to do that securely while releasing. People might have to scale to multiple instances or fewer instances by hand. Well, you can automate that using rules. So there are things you can do to reduce authorizations in your production environment. And I think when you start there, it gets you in a mood of thinking about hardening down your deployment.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of listeners probably have maybe the entire small development team having full production access. They can query the production database. They can remote desktop into the servers that are running the production instance of the software. And if they're on the hook for support or reading log files, then they might have had production access for a long time, and they need that to get their job done. And they just don't know a different way to do their work without actually having that administrative access.
I don't think it's uncommon to see in practice, but you can, when it comes, for example, for debugging and for logging, there are now things available in Azure using application insights to centralize your logs in another location than just having to browse them on the app service using Kudo or in the cloud service itself. So you can take them away from your production environment and explore them somewhere else. So it's not necessary.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then something else about having production access, if they're restoring a production copy of the database to a pre-production environment, they're essentially taking all of that production data, about however many customers, and putting it in a different environment itself. Wouldn't that be an issue?
It's definitely an issue. I think it's one of the first things I learned when it came to testing. You shall not take the production database and, I'm using air quotes, anonymize it, because I think we all know anonymization is pretty easy reversible often, and use it in your acceptance or testing environment. Because the second it goes out of production, it goes into an unsafe environment, often your personal computer, maybe even your personal laptop, and who knows what happens there. So no, that's not a thing I would recommend.
Yeah.
But the other thing, generating test data that represents production good enough is also really, really hard. So you might have a formal process of looking at production data and doing something, for example, to generate other data out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a SQL clone and data mask product from Redgate that really takes certain columns and tables and just either completely masks it or regenerates it. And so that's not anonymizing it. It's kind of redacting anything that might be sensitive or customer specific. That's an interesting process.
I've not heard of it, but at a company I used to work at, we did the same thing. We generated like a copy of the database where every lowercase character was replaced with a random lowercase character, every uppercase character with a random upper. So we wanted to keep the variety in the database, but we wanted to make sure that there wasn't an accidental de-anonymization possible after extraction.
Yeah, with security, so many people talk about who has access to what and where credentials are stored. But then there's the vulnerability sledgehammer of taking that entire database and copying it somewhere, because then it's on an environment with much less rigorous controls. And if that's compromised, that's everything.
Yes, there's also another scenario where that might happen if you make full backups of a database and you store them offsite, and offsite is in the basement of one of the engineers at home, because you want to protect them from risk like fire at the office, right? But all your crown jewels are also in the basement of one random IT guy. That's also a security risk. Yeah.
Then get into the debate: is offline more or less secure than online?
Oh,
are more hackers trying to break down a door, or more hackers trying to kind of sneak in through the internet somewhere?
I have no idea.
That's an aside.
We can only guess.
Well, let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
The Azure DevOps podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
And we're back. We're talking about security with DevOps with Henry Bain. And we're talking about people having personal human access to environments as being a security surface area. What are some other ways to limit that surface area?
Well, the Tuesday we talked also about infrastructure as code, which is of course often applied from a continuous delivery point of view. But in my opinion, it can also be a great security tool for two reasons. First of all, using infrastructure as code allows you to even kick more people out of your production environments, because you can also create and manage and scale and a lot of things of your infrastructure from your release pipeline. So no more standing access needed. Also, when you start doing complete deployments, which is a thing the Azure Resource Manager supports, everything that's not in your template will automatically be removed from your production environment. And this saves you from configuration drift, so a lot of errors, but it's also a great security feature, because if somehow a hacker gets in and he managed to get a VM up and running in your resource group, and 10 minutes later it's destroyed, well, that's better than him sitting there for weeks. Or he might be able to generate a firewall rule on your database, so he can now start trying usernames and password combinations. If 20 minutes later that firewall rule is back in place, well, you're hindering them more and more. And if you deploy often, like multiple times a day, and you always do complete deployments, removing everything from your production environment that's not defined in source control and adding everything that's defined in source control, well, you're just slamming the door back in their face every couple of hours.
That's a good point. There was a vulnerability that's still out there in the FCK HTML, what you see is what you get editor. That's really common website control that people were using, just a free HTML editor. And it can allow people to upload a file through the web browser, and it'll save it onto the actual disk, because so many people have the website running as a user that has enough credentials to write things on disk. And if you don't know that those new files are there, that could sit for months and months and months. But if the environment is recreated, at least it gets reset.
Yes, and you don't even really have to recreate the environment, because you can do the same thing with an app service deployment. When you use web deploy, there is just a simple checkbox that you can set: remove files at destination that are not part of the package.
Yeah,
and they will be kicked out. And you can exclude a directory that is meant for uploads, but that directory you're probably demarking for execution. And you're probably handling with much more care in your code when you're getting files from there. But all other directories, they will be cleaned whenever you do a deployment.
That's a good point. So besides infrastructure as code, that would just maybe suggest a scheduled automated deployment or a redeployment, even if nothing has changed.
I haven't done that, honestly, because there are still a lot of people who kind of fear the release. Mm-hmm. I've worked for 5 years at a company before I went independent, and the last 3.5 years we did continuous deployment for a number of services. Even every single check-in went to production within a matter of minutes. And still, every now and then, when somebody was doing a big demo, they said, can we maybe hold off the releases this afternoon because we're doing a demo? Still, there is this, I don't know.
There's pain from the past that they remember.
Yeah, probably. But it sticks around for years.
Yes.
I'm still young. I haven't.
Hey, we're all young. That'll never change.
Okay.
But that's true. I mean, we're all human, and there are painful memories of the past. There's a maintenance window where the system is taken down, and the system will be back up in an hour. That's what we tell ourselves. And then days later, there's issue after issue after issue, and everyone's thinking, how did this happen? How can we not just put it back the way it was? And they remember that pain, and it's almost like they need computer programmer therapy or something to get over the hurts of the past.
It's weird, because I don't think that the release was the cause of the pain of the issues, right? It was not releasing often. That was, I think, the cause of all the errors and problems popping up at once, all at the same couple of days. But oh well, it still happens, and even now and then we even oblige, because when somebody who is more important than you says, "And you shall not deploy this afternoon," then we're like, "Okay, yes, sir."
Absolutely, they often pay the bills.
Yes, and of course you have to mind, if you do a lot of deploys, you have to mind cold starts and the just-in-time compiler hitting or starting from scratch. So that's the thing that you have to keep in mind then.
Yeah, absolutely. You want that first hit to be automated and not experienced by a human.
Yes, you want to do it before the switch, because I've seen cold starts taking 2 minutes, and that will be painful for customers then.
Yes. Absolutely. And you had you've done some other things with policy to help with this too, right?
Azure Policy. It's a thing I like to talk about because it's not really well known. And I think, of course, when we hear policy, we think auditing and rules, and we're all like, ugh. But it's a great tool where on the one side, you have a development team doing ARM templates and just defining what they need, and there we go. And on the other hand, policy allows you to define things you don't want to see in your subscription and deal with it in 3 ways. Either take note, like audit, and notify somebody who can bring the pain back to the development team. It can just deny. So, you're trying to deploy a Bitcoin mining machine. Well, not going to happen. And it can even augment. So, for example, when you're deploying a Azure SQL DB and you're not providing a access rule for the IP address that is hosting, I don't know, some monitoring service, it can automatically add that firewall rule to your deployment. So policy can really help you to automatically apply security measures and just disallow anything you don't need. And if it's ever going to pop up, it's probably not done by you, like that Bitcoin machine. Because if I was a hacker and I got access to somebody's Azure subscription, it's the first thing I'm going to do, right? Spin up 10 of the most expensive machines and have them Bitcoin mining.
And there are some very expensive servers available.
Yes, you can become really poor in a couple of hours in Azure if you want.
Yeah, let me spin up the CERN supercomputer. Click.
There we go. Well, I don't know what happens, honestly, because if you're, for example, my bill is always, I don't know, between 100 and 200, 300 euros a month.
Mm-hmm.
If I would spin up a machine that would cost me like 10,000 euros a month, might there somebody of Azure like give me a call? So van Henry, we see this funny thing going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never tried it.
They'd give you a call if you didn't pay your bill.
Okay, now I haven't experienced that either, so so that speaks for me.
Well, I've done some folks on my team have done some of testing of spinning up some of the larger machines to see if it affects build times, and past a low certain point, it's not really effective in that case. I think because you're only limited to a certain number of cores, certain amount of RAM, and anything above that just doesn't get used anyway. So you really have to, I guess, understand your workload and make sure you can actually make use of that large of a machine. Fair
enough. But it's just not a thing you want to see, right? When you come back into the office and there is a machine of, 25,000 euros a month sitting at 100% CPU on your bill. It's not a thing you want to see. So you can prevent it by using policy, and you can use it to like disallow anything you're not using. And it's a great security tool.
Awesome. It seems like the current theme is if a human's account has access to something, then we're susceptible to the human engineering and that being compromised. But if we can automate more and more and more, it shrinks the surface area.
Well, I think especially if you're only using password access, it's well known, right? It's a really vulnerable attack surface. Just getting your hands on the identity of somebody and doing whatever you please on their behalf, or at least in their name.
Yeah. All right. So what's next for you, sir?
Well, first of all, I'm on a couple of days of holiday, a bit of planned. I'm between contracts right now, so a lot of time to learn and to study new things. I'm sucking down a lot of Pluralsight these days, and interviewing next week. And for next year, I'm starting on planning some new talks. I want to do something with regards to monitoring or logging. I think there is a market for that, but I think there are people who want to learn more about how to monitor their solutions in production. So that's the thing I'm exploring. And of course, I'm going on holiday to New Zealand in just under 2 months. So that's something I'm really, really looking forward to as well. Oh, and I almost forgot, because I'm just going to try and start something new, and that's training. And it's 2 ways actually. With a good old colleague of mine, Gerald Versluis. He's quite a well-known MVP in the Netherlands in the Xamarin space. I'm going to do a 1-day training, which is like aiming on getting people up to speed on cloud-based development. Things like Azure Functions, ARM templates, application insights. So it's a power training 1 day with probably people leaving confident that they can now do cloud development on their own and have a clear point of learning. And I am negotiating with a party on starting an online training, which I cannot say anything else about, but I'm really, really excited about.
Awesome. Well, what websites would you have them look at to keep up with that?
Just keep a tabs on my own blog or on my Twitter account, because I will probably shout it from the rooftops if it goes live. Okay,
we'll put those in the show notes. What's the blog and Twitter we should include?
My blog is just henrybeen.nl. No fancy taglines or anything. And my Twitter as well, Henry_Been.
Awesome.
Straightforward.
Awesome. Well, before we go, what should the listeners do next if they want to dig more into security in their DevOps environment?
I think a great way to start is, like I said, take a look at what's keeping you from kicking everybody out of production. And once you got that down, you can take a look at your complete pipeline from inception to stuff running in production, and like see all the activities that are happening there and just go through them one by one and ask yourself, what can go wrong? And you have to find that one devious, twisted mind in your company that can turn everything around. And he can probably tell you where the risks lie and how he would try to screw you over if possible. And I think you could take input like that to improve. And of course, there are a lot of presentations out there with ideas and approaches on how to harden your pipeline, like the webinar I did. But I do know for sure there are more people doing great presentations on these topics as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Henry, for visiting with me.
My pleasure, and have a great day.
And until next week, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.